Again, what a great joy to be here in Ananda Pune. As some of you may have heard, I was supposed to be here about 3 weeks ago, and it kept getting delayed and delayed. And some of you probably know the details, which I'll get into that because it touches on today's topic of overcoming tests, which is also a way of saying how to work out karma in the right way. Because I think for everyone on the spiritual path, we face our karma. Life is mostly a test of karma in the end and how we respond to it. And that's really the victory of life, is not what happens to us, but how we respond to the things that come to us. I was supposed to be here around the 16th or the 17th. And I'll probably tell the whole story just once, so get it out of the way, because it's a lot about hospitals and visits and all kinds of things. And about 5 weeks ago, I came down with viral fever, and after about 5 days, I just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And I finally said, I just need to go to the hospital and see what it is. And it did turn out to be dengue fever. And then while I was there having dengue fever, there was a lump in my neck that suddenly became very inflamed and active and painful and spreading nerve pain. And the doctors became very alarmed, and they did a needle biopsy, which is meaning they stick a needle and take a sample, and they found that it was cancer. So within a 5-day period, I had a diagnosis of dengue and a diagnosis of cancer. And I know my whole life Divine Mother is just playing with me. I'll cut to the end of the story just so you're not worried, but the cancer turned out to be benign, meaning that it's not spreading and it's not going to take over my body or anything. But it took me about 3 weeks to find that out, and the doctors were dragging it on and on. And as they did the test, I was just coming out of the hospital from dengue, and they said I needed to have a surgery to remove the tumor in their surrounding tissue to test to see whether it was benign or malignant. And they said I should wait 2 weeks to recover from dengue to get my strength back. And I told them, no, I need to go to Ananda Pune right away, as soon as I can. And so 3 days later, I was back in the hospital to have a 2-hour surgery. It was very delicate because there was a lot of nerves involved, because the cancer was a nerve sheath cancer. And so they had to take a lot of care. And then they took the sample to see whether it was spreading and whether it was benign or malignant. And if you're not familiar with cancer, benign means that it's localized and it's not going to take over. And malignant means that it's life-threatening, and you're probably going to have chemotherapy and more surgeries and the like. As soon as I came out of the surgery, one of the surgeons was there, and I asked him, how does it look? Can you tell me what you saw, what you think? And he knew what I was asking. And he said, well, it looks to be 50-50, whether it's malignant or benign. And so they had to do the tests on it. And so I sat there for about 2.5 weeks with a 50-50 diagnosis there, and the results kept getting delayed. And finally they said, well, there are, quote, some peculiarities in the test results, so we have to send it to Mumbai to be more fully tested. And my friend Vivek, who was actually talking to the doctors, they actually told him that it looked malignant, and they just had to confirm it. So the weight was pushing in the other direction of 50-50. Eventually, of course, as I said, it came back benign at the very, very end. But it was very interesting because for 2.5 weeks, I was sitting there, 50-50 chance. There was a fork in the road 2.5 weeks up ahead. And I was not going to be the one to decide which fork I was going to take. Divine Mother was going to decide that with my karma. And I actually was meditating on, well, what would I do, depending on whether I go this way or that. And I really felt like I was a cat, or I was a mouse, and the cat was playing with me, and Divine Mother was the cat. And when a cat's playing with a mouse, you don't know whether it's going to just play with the mouse or it's also going to eat the mouse. And I didn't know. But I felt so safe and so loved and so blessed throughout the process. And I laughed so much. I can't tell you how often I laughed during that time, because for whatever reason, I had a lot of karma in this life where I faced several near-death situations where I should have died. I thought I died. I was rescued off a mountaintop. I almost drowned, and just so many different things. So I've learned that death, when you give your life to God and when you surrender to the Divine Mother, that death is blissful and it's just liberating. In fact, a few years ago on a flight to Argentina, it was an all-night flight, and you get into this twilight zone of sleep and dream and wakefulness. And I was sure that I was awake in this all-night flight. But it turns out I was really dreaming, because what happened was as I was sitting there, I could hear the plane engine. So, of course, I was awake because I could hear that. And then the engine started making very weird noises. And it started making like grinding noises and coughing and sputtering. And I was sure I was awake because I could hear it, of course. I was actually dreaming. And finally, the engine stopped and it died. And I heard one of the other passengers shout, "We're going down, we're going down." And I was absolutely sure we were going down and that this was the end of my life. And at that moment in my dream, I was so joyful. I just kept repeating over and over again, I get to go home, I get to go home, meaning back to my home in Divine Mother and God. And I was probably rather too excited about saying that, because at that point you should probably start thinking how to save yourself. But anyways, that's how I feel about it. And it's not that I have a death wish or anything, because I wanted to live and I want to serve. And in fact, as I was thinking about it, about that fork in the road, I thought, okay, what if it is malignant? What if I have chemotherapy? I've seen what chemotherapy does. What would I do? And what if the doctors told me you have 6 months and you'll have to go through chemotherapy, and maybe 6 months you'll leave the body? And I meditated and I thought, what I would do? I would do just the same. I would come to Pune City, serve to the very end, and give my life to God and Guru. Because I've seen that's for devotees, this is the way, is surrender and giving. My wife, she fought cancer for 10 years, so it's something I'm very familiar with. She was going through chemotherapy during one of these episodes. And chemotherapy is really brutal on the body. It just makes you really sick and weak. Your hair falls out and all kinds of other things. And every day as she was going through that, she would walk about 3/4 of a mile each way to our Sangha office at Ananda Village. And her office was right next to Jyotish and Deviji's office, who are the directors of Ananda, spiritual directors. And she would drag herself in there. And Devi finally said to her, "Maria, you don't have to come in to work every day." And Maria said, with a lot of feeling, she said, "Devi, you don't understand. I have to do this. This is what's keeping me going." And what was keeping her going was not just this intense physical activity, it was giving and serving. Because for a devotee, we have to keep expanding. Now, just going back to the cat and mouse story before I get into something else, there was a disciple of Yoganandaji, his most advanced woman disciple. Her name was Sister Gyanamata. And she went through 20 years of just brutal karma. She almost died 2 or 3 times, and Yoganandaji prayed to Divine Mother to keep her alive, and he brought her back. And one day she was very ill, and the master was giving the Sunday satsang, and she couldn't attend. She was in her room with a sister nun. But Master was miles and miles away, maybe 100 miles away. And she heard Master's voice in the Sunday satsang. And it was later confirmed that the words that she heard were actually, he said those words. And these words were this: "Dance of life or dance of death, know that these come from me, and rejoice. What more dost thou want than thou hast me?" And so that's how I felt with being this mouse. I was dance of life, dance of death, cat playing with me. Master even said one time, he said, Divine Mother eats people, is the way he put it. And people get a little shocked when they hear that. But what he meant was that she absorbs them back into herself. And so dance of life or dance of death, as long as we know the Mother is playing with us and dancing with us and holding our hand, what does it matter one way or the other? And so as long as we continually offer ourselves into that grace, into that light, that is the way to divine freedom. And even no matter what situation we're in, we can do that. And I have another story, and I hate to bore people with yet more and more hospital stories, but this is another one. Maybe Dr. Aditya probably enjoys these kinds of things. But this was many, many years ago. It was about 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And I was preparing on a Saturday to give the Sunday satsang at Ananda Village, and I was starting to get a lot of pain in my side. And the pain just kept getting worse and worse, and it was a very sharp, intense pain. And finally, around 10 o'clock at night, it was getting worse and worse. And finally, my wife, Maria, said, we have to get you to the emergency room to figure out what this is, because we don't know, and it could be serious. So I finally agreed. And we went to the emergency room, and it turned out to be gallstones, which we didn't know at the time. But we needed to find out. And I think with most hospitals in the world, Saturday night in the emergency room is a really exciting time there for the doctors. And Ananda Village is in a very rural area, and you just get people who got drunk, had accidents. Our doctor at Ananda Village, who started a clinic, he calls these Saturday night people who come to the hospital members of the Knife and Gun Club, because they shoot each other, they stab each other, and it's not really the best time to show up at the emergency room. So it was very busy. And I was in this room that was maybe this size with several other people in beds just waiting for a doctor to come. So I was waiting a long time. And the pain was so intense that all I could do was curl up in a ball in the fetal position. It was very sharp. And as I was lying there, I kind of looked at the corner of my eye and could overhear there was a young couple in a much worse situation than I was in. The doctor was with them, and they were about 17 years old. And the boy, he had had a drug overdose, and he was unconscious and in a coma. And his girlfriend was just obviously distraught and very emotional. And the doctor was trying to calm her down so that he could ask her questions. You know, what drug did he take? Was it an injection? What were the first symptoms? How long has he been under? Do you have a sample of the drug? And she was so hysterical she could hardly answer. And so I began praying for them. I prayed, Divine Mother, this boy, he made a youthful, stupid mistake. Don't take his life for something just so stupid. Let him live. Help him to understand what life is about. Teach him the meaning of life so he can get beyond this. And I prayed for the girl. Help her, bless her, calm her heart, calm her anguish. And the very strange and interesting thing happened, which was, without exaggeration, within 30 seconds, my pain went away from when I started to pray for them. And it was such an incredibly important lesson that the way out of suffering, out of tests, out of karma, is expansion rather than contraction on ourselves. In fact, I think for devotees and serious spiritual aspirants, I think the real challenge of intense physical pain isn't the pain so much, but that on some level there's a contraction that happens and we start to focus on the pain. And in that contraction, there's spiritual pain because we become smaller and we identify with the little self more and more. And so when I started praying, I expanded, my consciousness expanded. And in giving to others, even in the midst of pain and suffering, that is the greatest way to overcome our own tests. One time somebody asked Swami Kriyanandaji, they asked him, what is the sign or mark of an Ananda minister or acharya? And his answer was very interesting. It had nothing to do with spiritual knowledge or esoteric wisdom or even being a good speaker or anything. He very simply said that the true mark is when they're going through tests and challenges, they are still thinking of serving and giving to others. And it wasn't a challenge that he was giving. He was simply saying what this experience taught me, that the way out of tests, the way to overcome karmas, is to not identify so much with the little self and the test, but to keep giving, to keep serving. And it doesn't matter where you are at. You can be lying on a hospital bed in an emergency room in very intense pain, and you can still give to others. I've seen Swamiji do this time and again. And I'll tell a story about him doing that, and again, another lesson from it. What's happening is that when our consciousness is small, we're like a small puddle of water or mud. And I use this analogy a lot because it's so true in many ways. And the rock of karma is thrown into that puddle, and there's a big splash and big commotion, and it seems really big, that rock. But if you take the same rock and throw it into the ocean, there's just a little blip, and it goes under the water and becomes absorbed. And so I think most of us, when facing tests and karmas, we try to make the test smaller and push at it and work at it. And sometimes we need to also do that. But if instead you can work on changing yourself from the little puddle to the ocean, that test just will not affect you as much because you are so much bigger in your consciousness. Same rock, same karma, but just a little blip rather than a big splash and a big commotion. And again, the way out is giving to others. And again, here's something I learned from Swamiji. And I have to say, none of my experiences that I share can I take any credit for. They are from learning from Swami Kriyanandaji and my dear friends, and even from my wife, who was such an amazing example of transcendence over karma. So in the 1980s, when I was on Swamiji's staff, he had 2 hip replacement surgeries. And at least in those days, after he came out of the hospital, he still had about 3 days where he could not get out of bed. And so he needed 24-hour assistance in case there was something even in the middle of the night. And so my wife and I would sleep in the adjoining room, just on the floor. And in the middle of the night, if he needed help, he would ring this bell that he said belonged to his mother. It was part of his family. It just was a sweet thing that he did. And every night, 2 or 3 times, he would ring the bell. And it was just interesting to see that he was so incredibly gracious every time. His first response, as when we rushed in there, was, "Oh, I'm so sorry to wake you up. I'm so sorry to bother you, and I just need some help with this or that." And he was so gracious in thanking us for what we were doing. And of course, we were so incredibly grateful to be helping him in that way. And again, he was always thinking of giving. His whole life, really, all the things that he did, writing the books, giving lectures, traveling, it was all motivated on that one simple principle, to give and share with others. And in that giving and sharing, in spite of all kinds of intense physical karma, there was transcendence, there was expansion, eventually there was union with divine bliss. And that is the way. And again, I promise my last hospital story here. Because of that experience, I learned a really deep truth from him, which is that always look to be giving. Wherever we are, look to be giving and sharing, because he did that all the time. If he was paying for something at a shop, you could see he was giving the clerk behind the counter his love, his attention, trying to lift them up. Just like he was trying to uplift my wife and I when we were coming to him and serving him. And it's been so ingrained by spending so much time with Swamiji that I don't always succeed, but I try always to think of giving. And it's interesting that Swami Kriyanandaji, I think for myself, I learned more from how he behaved and how he acted than from just the writings and the teachings, because how he acted and how he behaved was really the expression in daily life of these great teachings. And so now whenever I'm in the hospital, I seem to have a lot of times in hospitals. This last time it was 5 or 6 days of spending overnight in the hospital and many, many visits for tests and consultations and doctors. But I've learned just a beautiful way of giving, which is that it becomes so ingrained, again, thanks to Swami Kriyanandaji. Nurse comes very often at 4 a.m, wakes you up, grabs your arm, and just gently shakes you to take some blood or to give you some antibiotic injection or something like that. And you know this is a really unpleasant job, to be waking people up who are in pain, who are maybe fearful. You probably get people kind of freaking out when they wake up and upset and grumbling and unhappy. And so it's just become a habit. As soon as I open my eyes, I just smile at them and say, "Oh, good morning, how are you doing?" And you can see they're surprised. And I just, again, following Swamiji's example, try to give in every single circumstance. And you will find, and I can see their appreciation, because they're used to people being upset or, "Oh, don't bother me," or "I'm in pain," or grumbling, and "Why this and why that." And so the answer to the tests of our karma, the way to overcome all these things, very simply, is to think of serving and giving when we're with others. And look for it. Do it in an active way. One of the most beautiful lines that Yoganandaji gave, it's part of the vow that he would give to his renunciates. And the line is, in carrying out thy wishes, I will be ambitious. And that's such a strange line for a renunciate, because so much of renunciation is, I won't do this, I won't do that, I will withdraw from the world, and it's about what you don't do. And here he's telling his monks, be ambitious. And ambition is usually thought of as coming from ego. And what he was really saying was, in serving God, in serving Guru, be proactive. Look for ways to give. Look for creative ways to serve and help others. I know one person, this woman was part of Ananda for many years. And she lived at Ananda Village, which is really just exquisitely beautiful, and forests and beautiful gardens and lots of space and trees and beautiful people. And she moved to San Francisco to serve with Swamiji. And she worked at a restaurant to try to support. And every day she would take the bus. And it wasn't a pleasant thing she was doing. It was completely against her nature. She was a nun, to take buses in the city early in the morning with strange people and situations and work in a restaurant. And she made her bus ride every day an act of giving. And she would choose one person every day on the bus, and she would look at them and she would pray for them. And she wouldn't stare at them and make them uncomfortable or anything like that, but often she would just look at the back of their head and send them energy and pray for them. And many times she had experiences where the person would turn around and just smile beautifully at her, or she would have some deep connection with that person. So again, in serving thee, I will be ambitious. And again, that doesn't mean, necessarily starting a gigantic business or something like that. It just means look for ways to give and to serve. And in the end, that's the greatest way to free ourselves from karma, is to help others and serve others. I'm going to end just by talking about a principle along these lines. Yoganandaji said that Sister Gyanamata was fully liberated by the end of her life. And one time, Swami Kriyanandaji was with the Master in an elevator, and Master just mentioned in a different context that in order to become fully liberated, you have to help free 6 others. And Swamiji had just the thought, and Master read his mind, and his thought was, but Sister Gyanamata didn't have disciples, because on the face of it, she didn't. Master read Swamiji's thought and said, Sister had disciples. And Swamiji was surprised that Master, maybe he wasn't surprised anymore at that point, that Master read his mind. But Master said something interesting about Sister. He said that she had 20 years of intense suffering. Master said that he prayed 3 times to keep her in the body. Why? So she could suffer some more. It sounds very cruel. But he said that her life was without sin, is the way he put it. He said he went through her consciousness, her life. He said even in thought, in her whole lifetime, she didn't have a sin. And the karma she was working out the karma of others. And she, as a guru and disciple, which is what Master said, she had disciples. She didn't sit there on the throne and have the disciples come and she gave these satsangs. She didn't do any of that thing. All she did was she gave to them and helped them by lifting and taking on the burden of some of their karma. And what's interesting is that the spiritual path is not it's not some contract that we sign. It's not so rational. But why do you have to free 6 others? And I don't think that those who are approaching that point of liberation have a checklist and they say, okay, I got 5 more to go and I'll be out of here. And who's ready? Maybe you choose someone who's almost there so you don't have as much work to do, or I don't know. But I think it's a principle, because all these things are based on true and deep principles. But I think the principle is that you have to be so willing to give to others and help others that you're willing to take on their cancer, their suffering, their physical karma intensely, and really experience great physical pain just to serve others. And again, it's not a checklist of 5 down, 1 to go, but it's developing the complete quality of utter selflessness and giving, to the point where you want to give even that much. Give your body, your life force, and everything. And when you have that high degree of giving to others and selflessness, then you achieve liberation. And that's why you have to help free 6 others, because she wasn't doing it by giving them profound teachings and lectures and guiding them. She did a bit of that, but it was through complete selfless giving. Again, finally, is the way to freedom. And again, that's what Swami Kriyanandaji showed us and gave to us. And so if we can all take that lesson to heart, and we'll have a celebration tomorrow of Swamiji's discipleship anniversary to Master. And we'll talk more about some of these things, because that really is the way to divine freedom. Serving God, serving the Guru, complete and utter selflessness and giving. And the little self expands and becomes one with the divine. And that is samadhi, bliss, divine union through giving. So may the Masters bless us always and help us always to expand and learn how to give under all circumstances. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.